Welcome to TruthStream. It's my great pleasure to introduce investigative reporter, journalist, author, LEO ZAGAMI, someone with a unique knowledge of secret societies and a lot of personal knowledge that we're going to get into today. So welcome, Leo, and thank you for joining us.
A pleasure to be on the TruthStream. So let's stream it and let's dig into the secrets of my work, which I guess are a novelty for your audience. So like we said before starting this show, we have a lot to discuss. I have this latest book, which is volume 8 of my confessions, but we have a lot to discuss because aside from volume 8, I guess that your audience, first of all, needs to know who is LEO ZAGAMI. LEO ZAGAMI is, like you said, a journalist, investigative journalist, but also an author, known mostly because I have exposed since now it's such a long time. It makes me feel old. No. It's been really a long time because, first of all, I was involved within this structure you called the Illuminati, the New World Order structure surrounding it until 2006. Then I went on the offense by exposing everything with a website. I saw that the website had its own limitations, censorship in premise. In the internet age, I was one of the first people to suffer censorship. I had my, I think, first Facebook account taken down in 2008. I think people didn't even know that Facebook could take their accounts down at that time. And since then, of course, I've been suffering a lot of censorship. So I've had since October 2020, 17 channels closed down on YouTube. I had a number of problems also in the early days when I was still on the internet. What really gave me the idea that I had to go and start writing books was in 2008 when I started to suffer a series of hacker attacks on my website in the very early stages because of certain things I had written against the Turkish, in particular, Illuminati. And so I got a direct attack that was really, I mean, was in my face. They actually made it known that there was them who were attacking me. The screen kind of went on a Turkish writing and it was like a threat. But since then, I understood that I had to do something to get this knowledge and to get it to everybody in a way that it will not simply disappear thanks to some censorship, somebody pushing a button on the internet. So in 2009, I started to publish books in Japan. I published my first books in Japan. The second country instead that got my books was then Italy in 2012. And that was, of course, a bestseller. In Japan, I also sold a lot. It was a bestseller. I must say my first two books sold almost 50,000 copies. And it was a big success in Japan. In Italy, though, it was quite impressive because I had tried over and over again to bring out my books, but nothing. Then at one point I found a publisher, and they published, you know, like a few hundred copies, maybe 900, 1,000 copies, just to give it a try. And it was like after a week, we need your permission for the second edition. It went #1, and it was actually a bestseller in Italy. It had 5, 6 editions, I think. So it was. Now we are at the 7th edition. So we have, it was a very big success for Italy. And then I published a number of books as the Illuminati Confession started as a project. I wanted to be a trilogy. I first brought out 3 books, which was summarizing the work that I had put together during my time in certain secret societies, also in Freemasonry, which is not a secret society because everybody knows about it, but a society with secrets. And then, of course, also my involvement with the Monte Carlo Lodge, intelligence services of various countries in various operations. And so all this became, of course, the base for my confessions. I then, fortunately, through Brad Olsen, published the trilogy, volume 1, 2, and 3, starting from 2015, I think. We brought out 14, actually. We started collaborating, and we signed a contract, and thanks also to the work that he did initially, we were able to finally have all my books that were already in Italian in the English language. We worked a lot, though, with him, with my wife, with all the various collaborators of CCCC Publishing, to make sure that these books didn't really look or sound as they were translated. And this took a number of years. The work that we did to translate the first 5 books that went on to Brad's publishing company took from summer 2014 to summer 2018, almost 4 years of constant work to get them all out. And then so it was a long job, but then it was good, because at that point we also saw in 2015 Alex Jones coming to Rome, doing a documentary based on the first book, which was my first book in the English language, which was Pope Francis, The Last Pope, ? And that was also a very successful book. For a book based on a subject which is a religious subject, it became a bestseller, and kind of like was very successful. And so the documentary also was very successful, that we shot with Alex in Rome. Then, of course, I collaborated with the Italian. I created an organization in 2015 because of Trump's candidacy. We believed in it, and we created an organization called Italians for Trump, which was a unique organization outside of America, because we were the only ones who supported also very much with the Italo-American community also here in America. It was an organization structured with people that were also in Trump Tower and everything, Italo-Americans. So it was a serious organization. In fact, when Trump arrived at the White House, we were the only ones who had this big event during his office. We did a big event in front of the American embassy. We did a big event in front of the Italian parliament in a palace in front of the Italian parliament, the prestigious places also. And there was the TVs all over the world, the newspapers talked about our initiative. So that was very successful. But of course, it made my life a living hell more and more in Italy, because Italy is a country in the hands of forces that didn't like what I was doing. And so they already started, see, in 2013, when my books were out from 2012, 2013 was the year in which my books were in every bookshop in Italy. And there was really a lot of my presence also on TV. I was featured on Berlusconi's TV channels and whatnot, on the radios. And so there was a lot of promotion until they understood that I wasn't really only a researcher. I was actually an activist, a politician myself. I was somebody who was ready to get into the game. And so I presented myself, I candidated myself, and then I participated to this pitchfork insurrection, revolution that blocked Italy for 2 or 3 months. And that created a lot of problems. They came and broke into my house. The police, they raided my place. They locked me up for 2 or 3 weeks in a place, which basically, this book talks about this at the beginning of the book, because when I was locked up in a place owned, basically run by the church together with the Tavistock Institute. And the actual guy, which I show in the book, Giuseppe Nicolò, Professor Giuseppe Nicolò, in front of my lawyer, Efisio Borreddo, said, I work for the Tavistock Institute. Now, for most people who don't know what is the Tavistock Institute is where the mind control program of the CIA MK Ultra was really originated before it was then experimented widely here in America. The very roots of the mind control programs, what was like social engineering, let's say, was actually experimented at the Tavistock Institute. And that is another subject we have discussed very much at length in my new book, because, of course, I wanted to explain how the moment in which you rebel to the system wants to block you, wants to stop you, wants to, and they try to do it in a very, very vicious way with me. Fortunately, I had my own connections. I was able to escape the grip, because they wanted to lock me up for life, inject me with lithium, do all kinds of BS. I was very lucky to get out of there, come to America, and that's when I stayed for 3 months in Long Beach, and I then signed the book contract with my friend Brad Olson. So, because in the meantime, in Italy, they had dropped all my books. Suddenly, all my books were taken off the shelves. I couldn't make a living anymore. I was facing complete censorship. The Journalist Association, which is the order of the journalists in Italy, is incredible how in Italy you have the order of the journalists, but that's something Mussolini kind of created. The order of the journalists had written that, had ordered to all the journalists, I mean, I'm a journalist too, to not mention my name anymore, don't talk about me in any way possible, neither me or the other people who have been active in the Pitchfork Revolution. So
Brad Olson's a big part of our channel. He's a friend of the channel, and we love Brad.
So basically,
had him on many times. Great guy.
To him, and he definitely did a great job in picking up a project. I read to him, though, through Sean Stone, the son of Oliver Stone. It was him. I was going in and out of Hollywood. That's really when I kind of wrote some of the initial material for Volume 8, which became an earlier book, which I brought out in Italy in 2015, called Illuminati and the Music of Hollywood. It was a smaller booklet, which kind of, it was my first experience with Hollywood. I mean, I went to Hollywood, and aside from this great opportunity of signing the book deal with Brad, that was able to launch my book, my writing career here in the States and in the English-speaking world. With Sean Stone, I was also, of course, working still as an investigative journalist, and I wanted to know from him and from all his friends, producers, actors in Hollywood, what was real about all this talk about Illuminati in Hollywood, this and that. As Sean Stone is a Freemason like me, he was actually initiated in the Garibaldi Lodge in New York, which only usually initiates people that have some Italian blood. Because also the Garibaldi Lodge is at the origins of the Order of the Sons of Italy in America, which is a very influential order here in America. So I went on studying for 3 months, going in and out of Hollywood every day, studying the situation, meeting the people, asking questions. And I had confirmation more than I bargained for, actually. And that's how I started my work. With this book, I go even further, because as some of you may know, I did a show for a number of months during the pandemic with Roseanne Barr. And with Roseanne, we still work together very closely. And I work very, very much together with members of the Chabad Jewish community, because we feel that there is a lot of unjustified anti-Semitism, and that you need to put some clarity. But in my books, I bring forward this clarity when I discuss the Sabbatean Frankist heresy. That is a subject I start discussing in Volume 4 of my Confessions. I went on then in Volume 7 also, and in Volume 8, of course, because Hollywood is the playground of the Sabbatean Frankists, aside from being the playground of the disciples of Aleister Crowley, who himself, with Telema, was very much influenced by the Sabbatean Frankists. Now, for those who don't know what the Sabbatean Frankists is, an heresy within Judaism, sabbatized heavy, was this guy who believed he was the Messiah, who wanted to bring the Messianic era through redemption through sin. Let's all sin, let's make a big orgy, let's have some real sexual magic. Maybe God is going to get so pissed off, he's going to send the Messiah. That's the kind of concept, a bit sick, but it kind of worked. And a century later, a guy called Jacob Frank, who claimed to be the reincarnation of Shabbatai Zeri, because it's very important that people realize that in Judaism, there is the reincarnation aspect, which is fully accepted by Kabbalists and by people who study mystic Judaism. So there is this reincarnation of Shabbatai Zeri, which is Jacob Frank, and that's why it's known as Sabbatian, and that Jacob Frankism. So together, then, it became Sabbatian Frankism. Under Jacob Frank, we see the tendencies expanding towards the infiltration of the Catholic world. In fact, 20,000 converts passed on to becoming Catholic, but they actually retained their secret Jewish heresy, because that was the way of Jacob Frank. A bit like the crypto Jews who had been persecuted earlier in south of Spain did, by maintaining themselves secretly Jewish and outwardly maybe Christian. He said, okay, I'm going to outwardly convert to Islam. And in 1666, he converted in front of the Sultan. He said, I'm Muslim. And that was it. I mean, the facade was saved. But then a group that still exists today in Turkey was born, which is called the Dome, which is the Sabbatians, which is basically people who secretly have followed this Jewish heresy. And amongst them, there has been also people who have been very influential in Freemasonry, especially in Salonico. There was a nucleus of Sabbatian Frankists who were capable of initiating Rudolf von Sembotendorf, who later founded the Thule Gesellschaft for Adolf Hitler, the place where the pedestal to launch Adolf Hitler. At the same time, these initiates, of course, that hide behind the Sabbatian Frankists still exist today in the realms of politics, like Henry Kissinger, for example. Yeah. And Henry Kissinger, in fact, was actually excommunicated, even if the term excommunicated is improper for a Jewish person, but he was ritually casted out of his own religion by a ritual, condemning him as a Sabbatian Frankist that was called Rabbi Altenman had conducted. So the work that I wanted to do in volume 8 was to explain how Hollywood started in 1909, 1910. This is the 2 years which really changed the course of the world, but not only the visible world, which you, of course, then have with Hollywood, rather also the invisible world. With Aleister Crowley went in 1909 to the desert in Northern Africa to do the Coronzon ritual with Victor Neuburg, and that was the opening of the gates of hell, literally. And that was the year in which a gentleman known as D.W. Griffith came to a dirt road here in Southern California that became Hollywood Boulevard and shot his first movie. And then in 1910, in Caxton Hall, Aleister Crowley, who I define in my book as the first rock star, because he goes like Marilyn Manson, starts cutting himself, taking peyote in front of the audience and in front of the journalists. So this was the first public magician ceremony made by a black magician in modern times, with all the tabloids present. I mean, and from that moment onwards, Crowleyanity really goes along very well with the Sabbatian Frankists for one reason, and people don't know this historically. I explained this in volume 4 of my confession. I also tried to further explain it in volume 7. But the thing is that Madame Blavatsky is the founder of the Theosophical Society in 1875. Everybody knows she's the creator of the word the New Age, so everybody knows who is Madame Blavatsky. But nobody knows that Madame Blavatsky really is the founder of modern. I mean, without her, we will not have modern Satanism, because around her, everything that is occult manifested. Crowley himself when he does his famous drawing with the image of the lamb, he's actually drawing for a book by Madame Blavatsky, not his own book, so people know. And he used the network, the Theosophical network, to establish his own creed, and later on, when he took over the OTO, to establish his OTO takeover. OTO, for those who don't know, is Ordo Templi Orientis, and it's a sect, paramasonic, which stole a lot from Freemasonry, which was created as an Academia Masonica by Theodor Reuss and another gentleman, pharmacist in Austria, very rich guy. And they brought together the concept that finally they had to go back to the roots of Freemasonry. They had to discover really what they were doing in these lodges, and they wanted to bring also sexual magic into the equation, which kind of became like a kinky affair, especially in those Victorian times, for people like Aleister Crowley. So the 1909, 1910 is the moment in which Hollywood is born. But 1916 is the moment in which Hollywood began Hollywood Babylon, with the film Intolerance by D.W. Griffith, with these big scenographies of Babylon get left. And actually what inspires the film Babylon, which just came out by the director of Babylon. Yeah. Even if that's, of course, in the realm of fiction. Who discussed the Hollywood Babylon in the realm of reality, though is accused of having kind of romanticized it or maybe made it too overly dramatic, was, of course, Kenneth Anger. Is Kenneth Anger, who is still living proof of this mix between occultism and film art, because Kenneth Anger is regarded, first of all, as an underground filmmaker. When in reality you go and see the films of Kenneth Anger, you see that these are rituals. They are not filmed. Now, I used to be a member of the OTO, and I used to be connected directly to Kenneth Anger. And so here I have something I can show your viewers.
So did you say you were a member of the OTO?
Yes, for a number of years. In an 8th degree. I only gave up on the OTO as my book, Volume 1. If somebody wants to go and see all my history in the OTO, just go to Volume 1, which I published with Barad, which depicts my adventures with the OTO and how I joined this sect and how I was disgusted by it once I was given the secrets of the high degrees, which included sacrifice fetuses and all kinds of things which were, for me, totally satanic and not possible to follow in any way. That actually led to my idea that I had to reform Freemasonry, and I had to avoid this infiltration. And this, though, led to an internal war. It lasted between 2003 and 2006. But then in the end, of course, the OTO, and then later on, of course, with my work that I did with my own order, I tried in some way to maybe work with the OTO, because at that time, until 2006, like I said before, I started my exposure work in 2006. But before then, I was involved with all this world of secret societies, of Freemasonry, and so on.
If I could interject, I tell people this all the time, and in order to understand the world you live in, you really have to understand the work of Aleister Crowley and the OTO, yes, and its impact, and it's everything from music and entertainment, certainly cinema, and believe it or not, the military industrial complex through Jack Parsons, who was very close with a devotee of Thelema in Pasadena in the early 40s, late 30s, early 40s. So I mean, this is the man that can tell you all about it. And I really want to encourage people to get familiar with Leo's work for that reason. It's a very important piece to the puzzle if you don't already know.
I mean, this book then introduces to what Crowley said about his first impression of Hollywood was basically these people are so degenerate, orgies and cocaine. Crowley was actually shocked by Hollywood. But I think that the shock was a positive one, because then it was Hollywood, the place he decided to do the first Gnostic Mass in the world. His followers did the first Gnostic Mass that was put together, devised by Crowley, in Side Word of Hollywood Boulevard. I, in fact, say this in my book, but then this young actor who was basically there, described the Hollywood Babylon better than anybody else, and that is Kenneth Anger, because he wrote also some books about it, about the 20s, the roaring 20s and 30s, and what happened, especially in the 20s, the decadence that now, of course, the film Babylon that just came out is trying to portray, but he also describes all the scandals before it was, because even now, if you think about it, the film Babylon is it's a fiction. They didn't have the courage to portray what really went on in those days because they would go against their own studios.
Oh yeah.
Because D.W. Griffith was then the co-founder with Charlie Chaplin of United Artists, and Charlie Chaplin was a pedophile who was accused of sleeping with a 14-year-old child. And many other things that he did that were always hidden, apart from being a communist and being exposed as such during the Red Scare period, which forced them to not come back for a time. Now, we were talking about Kenneth Anger, and Kenneth Anger, like I said, is a very important guy. Now, this letter in particular that he wrote to me back in 2003 when I was living, as you can see, in Oslo, and he has his own personal stamp like that.
Wow.
Now, Kenneth Anger, and he, I mean, I must say, he was very kind with me, always very much a gentleman. The letter is in itself a work of art.
Wow. Jeez.
And it talks about the gathering that, as you can see, we were organizing for the 100th anniversary of the Book of the Law that was delivered in 1904 in Cairo. And in Cairo, basically, Aleister Crowley arrived with his new wife, and he went to the Pyramid of Giza to stay there for one night. He had published, prior to that, 1903, a book, De Goetia, with MacGregor Matters, who was his mentor at the time and the head of the Golden Dawn, who had translated also the Magic of Abramelin the Mage, which he started to practice, but then interrupted suddenly. He was in Boleskine, a famous house that after Jimmy Page would buy for a period of time. And he was inside the great Pyramid of Giza. He started to recite this invocation of the boneless one. And at that point, later on, the wife started to go in a state of trance for 3 days. Then, you see, when April 8, 10, and then, of course, all in that period, which is the period in which Crowley received the Book of the Law channeled by his wife. After, though, being indicated that by his wife, that was, of course, possessed by a demon, because these people are dealing with demons. And you can call them ancient Egyptian deities, you can call them demons, you can call them maybe not jinn, as they call them in Islamic tradition, but they're always the same thing. Now,
I think Rose, his wife Rose, had told him that it was Horus that wanted to speak to him directly, and she had channeled what she said was Horus's voice through her, and what was to become the Book of the Law.
It was a messenger of Rahor Parkrat, a messenger of Horus. Let's say that then, you know, these deities manifest with various names. And of course, it was Horus, but it can also be interpreted as Kenneth Grant said, as Lucifer. You know, so it's like. So what happened was this: she goes in a trance. She transmits to him this Book of the Law. He writes down this Book of the Law. Eventually, he goes back after completing the Magic of Abramelin the Mage. He says in China. Eventually, though I think he had a lot of problems. I think the small child they had with Rose Kelly died. All kinds of terrible stuff that happens to Satanists, which usually it's all part of their karma, no? I guess. So it's not like they are dealing with very light stuff. So at that point, he kind of wanted to forget about this book. For a number of years, he kind of put it just, you know, in a drawer. He left it there. And it was only many years later, after he kind of, after all that triggering those energies also with the Coronzon ritual and with the ritual that was done the year later, that he relaunched the idea that this was the book that would change not only his life, but the course of mankind, because he saw himself at that point as a prophet. And to enable himself to be a prophet, then he says, okay, I have the means of spreading my word now, because he was also contacted by Theodor Heuss, who was an Illuminati. He himself, with Leopold Engel, had basically been the refounders in the 1880s of the Illuminati in Germany. Then later on participated Theodor Heuss to the foundation of the OTO as an Academia Masonic, as something that was supposed to be simply open to Master Masons who wanted to perfectionate themselves into, like they do in the rites of Freemasonry. In fact, at one point, Crowley even tried to see if he could take control of a Masonic rite like the Memphis and Mizraim, which he included with everything else that he was initiated in. He made a big mix. But the problem was that he often received accusations that his rituals were stolen from Freemasonry, especially when he was here in America, in Detroit. He was accused of having literally stolen, and they said to him, you can't continue. So he was forced into modifying and adapting more and more. Though when you go into the system, like I was initiated until the 8th degree, but I know also the other degrees, because at that point you get really to have the whole system in your hands, and you know what are the writings, the extractions, and everything. What happened is that basically he didn't really change much on certain elements. He just simply mixed them in a way that he put his own telema, of course, all over the place, because the OTO wasn't born as a vehicle for its own religion. It was hijacked. It was originally a Gnostic, Christian, Neo-Templar sect.
Like a mystery school.
A mystery school, of course, based like many others on Rosicrucianism, based on alchemy, based on Gnosticism, mostly, that was very fashionable. It had kind of been relaunched in the 1880s in France and was having a revival even before the Nag Hammadi writings were discovered. There was this Gnostic revival.
Steiner, Gurdjieff.
Steiner was part of Theosophy. Of course, I said everything is connected to Theosophy. Even the Adolf Hitler and the rise of Hitler is connected to Theosophy, of course, and all those people who were who gave him his Aryan ideas of superiority were all from that milieu, from that group of people. And there was also a Neo-Templar group that was founded back in those days, the Novo Ordo Templi, a new Templar order, which was also, so we can say that that when it comes down to the Theosophical Society, without the Theosophical Society, you will not have modern Satanism, because you have Aleister Crowley. Then from Aleister Crowley, in the 60s, from that same milieu of Berkeley that later became the grounds for the first Grand Lodge of the OTO in the 70s, well, Anton LaVey decided that he didn't want to have anything to do with something that was too overly elaborate, intellectual, complicated, Gnostic. He wanted to reach the masses. And that was the first stage of modern Satanism in the year zero of Satanism, Anno Satanas, 1966. which coincides, by the way, like I explained in another book I wrote, which is this, with volume 6.66, it coincides with the first year of the post-conciliatory era, because until December 1965, you had the Second Vatican Council at work, and you had also the first satanic mass at work in 1963 in the Vatican, as reported also by Malachi Martin. So in volume 8 of my Confessions, I also explain how the post-conciliatory war, even in the Vatican, became an opportunity for Satan. No more Latin, which Satan and the demons hate Latin, so no more Latin. Started to bring guitars in the church, singing, the revolution, flower power became embraced by the Catholic Church. Suddenly you will not have the mass you used to have in a traditional way, and suddenly these new ways broke into the traditional mass, and reforming everything that was known to Catholicism until we arrive now to Pope Francis, who's a complete heretic. So this is the path that we see. And in my book, I explain. And of course, with music, bringing, you know, Bob Dylan to perform in front of John Paul II, as well as lifting the censorship of a lot of music, because when the Beatles put Sgt. Pepper on the Sgt. Pepper Lonely Heart, they put the Aleister Crowley image. The Vatican immediately put them on the blacklist. They were censored by the Vatican radios.
Bob Dylan's famous for telling the world how he sold his soul.
Yeah, yeah.
But with the Lima, if you don't mind my interjecting, the
connection also with
the catch-all, with the Book of the Law is, "Do as thou wilt, that shall be the whole of the law." Understand that phrase? That tells you an awful lot about, you know, the thinking behind this and why it was embraced and how you see it expressed. I mean, you'll see it on what Beyonce and Jay-Z's apparel. So this is very, very much a part of the world you live in now. This isn't just a history lesson. It's very significant.
No, you're completely right. I mean, and it's extremely influential, Aleister Crowley, in the soul contest. But when it comes to Bob Dylan, he didn't only sell his soul to the devil. You don't know, but the name Bob Dylan comes directly from a disciple of Aleister Crowley.
But now, Leo, you talk about this in chapter 3 of your new book, right?
Yeah, I don't know if you know Dylan Thomas. He was a Welsh poet, writer, and playwright who basically inspired the artistic name of Bob Dylan. Well, let me tell you, Dylan Thomas, who died in 1953, was in turn inspired by Victor Neuburg, the disciple of Crowley, who was performing the Coronzo ritual in the desert, and with him in Caxton Hall. So Bob Dylan also is, you know, it's not only David Bowie. David Bowie also totally immersed in that reality, but many others. I mean, in my book here, I also show some photos of the thing. But here I want to show you a document, just to show you that, because today we are showing, you know, the letter of Kenneth Anger. Now I show you a letter of William Burroughs.
Wow. Wow.
This interview is, I mean,
spectacular. Yeah.
This interview is almost spectacular as your suit.
It's a beautiful suit.
You're impeccable. I gotta say, listening to you guys talk, because Scott studied this bit more than I have. This is a beautiful thing to behold. Anyway, as you were, gentlemen, this is amazing. Go ahead.
No, you're right. Also, the fact that at least you know a little bit of what I'm talking about, because you seem very acquainted with a lot of these aspects, also because you were an actor, a producer, and you also have been involved in the music business. So you both come from experiences that are connected with what I'm discussing here. So you know exactly the importance and the relevance that maybe other people who don't really know who these people are, they will say, okay, whatever, William Burroughs, whatever. But when it comes to William Burroughs, I would like to remind our viewers, without William Burroughs, you will not have Wild Boys, Now, What Boys is a book, but it's also because, you know, I like to show in my book, you know, I have also signed the copy of this book, which inspired in turn the song by Duran Duran. It inspired the Boy Hat of Boy George and the Pet Shop Boys, which I used to know. And thanks to my connection, my grandmother used to know all these people. So I started as you might know, as a DJ, record producer. My career, I worked for many years also in the radio, and one of my first interviews was with the Pet Shop Boys. The Pet Shop Boys, because the Pet Shop Boys were great fans. They were, you remember the Pet Shop Boys in the early stages when they singing Western Girls used to go with a boy hat, but everything was not simply connected to Boy George. People thought it was Boy George, but Boy George was inspired. Boy George was a tool in the hands of its controllers, in a way, no? So the image of Boy George is the image of Quentin Crisp. If you don't know who is Quentin Crisp, of course you can't follow me. But if you go on YouTube and you put An Alien in New York of 1990 of Quentin Crisp with Sting, well, you will see that the main actress is actually my grandmother incoming.
Wow.
Dude, this is blowing my mind.
That is fantastic.
So you will see her there, and then of course you will realize that then the familiarity of the whole context when they talk also of the bunker of William Burroughs, people which in one way or another, even if I must say they were not saints, they were not all positive in their views, they helped me discover a reality. I was lucky enough to be introduced in this reality from a very early age. Never been abused, never was abused. I was lucky, though, to still have the possibility to meet all these people. And yeah, like in 1982, the first time I came to the United States, the first person I met off the plane was Quentin Crisp, which looked like later on Boy George, which I then met Boy George as a DJ, and I actually was able to work with him and to meet him, so to know him. So these people, I had the opportunity, though I'm not, you know, these are very close kind of circles. Either you are homosexual or you are into certain things, or I'm not homosexual, but I was able, thanks to my grandmother, who was very much a woman, an artist, very well accepted in certain circles, let's say. In fact, she ended up also teaching at the Actor Studio for a brief period. She was teaching at the Joanna White acting school, which I also went for a period of time myself, because when I was 16 and I was I started my radio show when I was 13. I interviewed Brian Geisen when I was 13, which is like interviewing, I don't know. Brian Geisen was hanging out with Brian Jones, was the guy who was basically the musicians of Jujuka, the smoking these incredible amounts of hashish in front of these rituals dedicated to the great god Pan. The Rolling Stones were all there, and it became then, of course, then we know what happened with unfortunately one of them who died and who probably was the victim of this whole situation. The Rolling Stones, let's say the worst Stones were capable of going on, and they're still with us today. They have sold their soul to the devil numerous times, and they are still with us, Mick Jagger and the others. And this is, of course, rather shocking when you think how old they are, and you know.
Well, Leo, let me ask. Can you explain to the viewers what it means to sell one's soul? What does that mean?
Well, you see, when it comes to the music business, we have the typical Crossroads concept, which was also launched, you know, when you talk about the Crossroads, that's when it's also when we talk about, for example, we said that the Crossroads is in some way we can also link it to Bob Dylan, because Bob Dylan went away not really knowing so well how to play, came back and was playing great. Then we know though that the actual crossroad is at the very basis, at the very origins of blues, and some of the most incredible musicians who suddenly one day at the crossroad, they sell their soul and they make a deal. Now, this is, of course, symbolic of a deal that was known from the time of, from ancient times. I mean, when it comes to Goethe, he wrote the Faust, but Faust is based on a very ancient myth, which was already known for various centuries, a guy who really went around and who existed apparently in Germany, known as Faust, who sold the soul to the devil, meaning he had the possibility then to acquire an unlimited amount of power. Now, Murnau, I think, who we all know for some of the very early silent movies, made an excellent Faust, which I suggest you can go on YouTube and you can see, because it gives you really the idea of what means a pact with the devil. Pact with the devil, well, we can say that the grimoires that gave the possibility to people to accede to the pact with the devil started circulating 5 or 6 centuries ago, very much. And one of these grimoires, they were all kind of like based, between brackets, on, you know, Solomonic magic in some way, they said. No? There was a specific one which gave the possibility of signing yourself off to Luci Fugge Fogale, and then at that point benefit, all the things that you were asking would be granted to you in exchange, of course, of your soul. No? The actual selling of the soul seems to be then a pact that has to be signed with blood, or has to be done in a way with uttermost seriousness, because at times when they are making these invocations, they are using ancient grimoires, which has these seals and stuff, which is sigil, seals which evoke this entity, and that entity obviously wants something in exchange. Now, this is something that people need to understand. You can't just open a book of black magic and start throwing curses around. It will be way too easy.
Right.
Because the moment in which you do that, the curse will come back to you. Or the entity that you have used for that curse, require that thing, will come back to you and say, so what have you done for me lately?
Mm-hmm.
That's why the magician has to sacrifice to obtain, sacrifice a chicken, sacrifice an animal, sacrifice when they want more and more a human being, a child, a virgin. Because there is an exchange. I give you, you give me. Those two, so it's an exchange here. It's not, you can't ask these entities without giving them something. You can't ask Satan and his legion to help you out just because you have a pretty face. You, and that's the problem of a lot of people who these days open magical grimoires and they start, you know, adventuring themselves in the occult. I always say, beware of what you're doing, because it's not worth it, and because you are risking way too much without really knowing. You're opening the doors to entities that will then come into your life, and that is very difficult after to shut that door and to keep that entity out of your life once you have.
Right. So
people don't realize this it's real. It works.
Yeah. So I want
it's not good.
Right. So some people are realizing in the world, like I'm someone that wasn't really aware of this a few years ago, probably, that Satan's really real. This isn't just a mythical creature. You sell your soul. There's really something. There's dark powers. There's dark entities. I mean, can you elaborate a little bit with, you know, that this truly exists? This isn't just hearsay. This is just
mythology. It's way beyond
mythology. This isn't hyperbole. This is real.
Well, of course, you know, if you're not a believer, if you are a pragmatist who hates any form of religiosity, I'm not able to help you believe. I'm not like suddenly I will be able to manifest something to make you believe. I mean, either you believe or either you don't believe. And the people who don't believe, unfortunately, are victims often of these things without really knowing what's happening to them, and they end up failing miserably in their ego-built system, which doesn't accept God. In the end, God says, "Okay, fine," and then you learn a lesson in life in one way or in another.
Crowley is a good example of where this always leads. I mean, this was a man that garnered
died basically
immense power, and yet he died what, a syphilitic, obese,
an heroin addict. He died with basically a needle in his arm.
Doesn't work out very well for most of these folks.
No, it doesn't work out, and it will never work out. But when it comes down to Crowley, he knew what he was doing. At least he was conscious of what he was doing. He deliberately did it. He did it until the end, and he says he wasn't like I don't think he ever had any regrets, because he was really fulfilling a task, which is the task of the beast, the task of to lead to the way of to prepare the Antichrist, and the way to the Antichrist. You see, the path of the Antichrist is kind of it's prepared through him, through his initiatic system, through his sect, through his writings, for his highly influential teachings, because in places like Hollywood these days, you feel the teachings of Crowley all around you. You just turn around, you have Johnny Depp, you turn around, you have James Franco, turn around, you have another guy, and they're all in one way or another influenced by Aleister Crowley. They might not always openly say it, but most of them, of course, have studied his works. Then there is those people who have gone one step further and then become like Jimmy Page. But Jimmy Page is directly involved with Crowley, his legacy. He got a great collection of stuff that is unprecedented. In fact, I remember many times when I was in London hearing the head of the OTO talking with Page about borrowing this or this other for an exhibition. That means direct involvement. When it comes to the way that is described in my book, The Ideology. This book it says here, from the rise of the Antichrist to the sound of the devil and the Great Reset. What does it mean? It means that without Hollywood then projecting into a reality with this new magical illusion, which is cinema, all these things, we will not have transformed in 100 years and went from the American dream of the 50s, the conservative family sitting around the table that was pushed after the Second World War to give a sense of tranquility, of a sense also of tradition, of everything that was opposing communism in those days. So, that was the values they were pushing. And then gradually things change. Things change because in Hollywood, LSD arrives. And it kind of becomes the alchemical tool that transforms the whole of Hollywood. The actors, the film directors, the producer, everybody suddenly was on LSD. So the LSD opens those doors which permit selling your soul to the devil in a much easier way. And you can actually take a trip of LSD or peyote or ayahuasca and never come back. And you have basically, at that point, you come back from it, but you have entities that are leashing on you like vampires, are sucking your energy and that are using you.
So I gotta ask on that, looking at chapter 2 of your book, on the topic of RCA Elvis and the 360 control of the world of entertainment. Tell us about Elvis, an American icon. Please go into Elvis Presley, because I think this is a very pivotal and powerful part of this conversation?
I think Elvis Presley sits really, you know, I mean, we have been talking about the crossroads, of course, concept, and people before Elvis who had sold their soul to the devil, people like, you know, Robert Johnson, or people who basically were at the basis of a music revolution that gradually influenced also the white people. And where was Elvis growing up? It was growing up in a prevalently black neighborhood with black people. And even in the film Elvis, which just came out not so long ago, you can see the influence of voodoo, dancing, people participate, ceremonial. He's watching, and these people, what are they doing? What are they doing? Because the thing is this, that we have imported slaves in this country. And those slaves brought with them the animist tradition that often they hid. At times they hid even with the music which seemed holy, like gospel. But in reality, when we go and see the roots of this music comes from animist tradition. And that's why in my book, I have a whole chapter on voodoo and how voodoo and Freemasonry have basically, Freemasonry has influenced voodoo, and how voodoo has influenced also the birth of one of the most important Masonic rites, which is the ancient and accepted Scottish rite. Elvis Presley was born into this, and then became himself the victim of the military-industrial complex, which used him. I mean, his manager was a fake colonel, though, who had been involved with mind control programs and who had been involved with experimentations, and who was given after, you know, he was actually involved even probably with a murder in his earlier life that he covered up, the Colonel Parker, the guy who basically managed Elvis Presley. And Elvis Presley danced around, breaking the boundaries of that conservative society of the 50s, the society that I was telling you about just a moment ago was the American dream around the table. Here arrives Elvis dancing around, creating social engineering with the first concert, especially the one in Vancouver, which became legendary, in which people were literally killing themselves by just walking on top of each other. Elvis! And the ladies wake. This is the moment in which the record labels, the companies behind them, which was the military-industrial complex, because all the record labels were born in times of war as part of the military-industrial complex. RCA, EMI in England. These are actually originally companies that were making electrics and radio stuff for the army. So you are talking about companies that come from the military-industrial complex. The war is finished. We have to launch. The Anglo-Saxon word has to be predominant. The English language has to be dominant, because Alistair Crowley said, I give you this book in English and has to stay in English, and that is the only language you have to ever use for me. I know people will say, but why are you talking about Alistair Crowley? Alistair Crowley, within a contest, which was a contest, a diabolic contest. He was like the mystery of Satan on this planet. So you ask me, you don't believe, then you can't understand. But of course, what I'm telling you today is all based on facts. So when you have all these facts, how you cannot believe? Elvis, of course, became later the victim of a curse in the way that he conducted himself. And he had moments in which he understood that the music business was led astray, and it was about to embrace what then later, much later, became woke. Now today, the woke ideology and all this. But in the early stages, it was already the leftist, you know, the leftist Black Panthers, the leftists of the various movements, political movements that were involved in that time, and that Elvis wanted to denounce when he went to Nixon and he asked that famous badge. But then Elvis became the victim of his own demons when he was unfortunately fed with drugs by his management. And when you are fed with drugs, you open inevitably to demons. The problem is that with the drugs you have, of course, the drug can be simply recreational, and that is a joint, marijuana. We relax, we smoke, who cares? That's fine. But then we have drugs that are opening doors, like I said before, that opening, and you have to have the keys when you open those doors. You have to have the keys to open those gates. Crowley knew that very well. He actually worked with Peyote. He worked with Huxley. He initiated Huxley. This is incredible, because here we have a direct link between the guy who offers you the doors of perception that became the myth of Jim Morrison, the son of a military industrial complex guy, by the way.
Yeah.
In Venice Beach, a place which 11 years ago in 2012 is then used for a ritual. The same ritual that was done in 1910 in Caxton Hall was done in Venice Beach in a gallery organized by James Franco and other people in Hollywood. James Franco, in the end, officially doesn't participate, though we don't really know, because everybody's covered in the ritual is public in a art gallery, but it becomes is a ritual. It's the rich rites of Eloise. They are invoking the spirit of Mars, the spirit of war, the spirit of war that started just later on, unfortunately, delivering something that we should have left there, no? Because then you have the beginning of the war in Ukraine, not now, back then you have the problem starting. And so in this book, there is an account of the military industrial complex involvement in Hollywood, which starts in 1915 with Birth of a Nation, which is another film by D.W. Griffith, which parades as heroes the KKK. And those tanks which are used for that movie are actually delivered by the military industrial complex of back then, who starts this collaboration until they open between the 30s and the 40s a office in Hollywood, this entertainment liaison office that basically is still there. And for the first time in my book, I show a photo inside the office where the guy shows all the movies, all the various, some of the movies, because they participate with hundreds and hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of movies. The military industrial complex basically does this. Are you making a war movie? Okay, we give you the weapons, we give you this, we give you that. In exchange, you have to give us the script, and we decide if the script is good.
Of course.
This way, every single script from every single war movie in Hollywood has been censored, adapted, manipulated by these Hollywood people. And then, and so it's very interesting for me, at least, to show how this connection with the military industrial complex is it's a real connection, but at the same time, we have a connection with the occult. And there is a connection between the military industrial complex and the occult, which is in the person of Michael Aquino. He's not with us anymore, but Michael Aquino participated with Anton LaVey in the early 70s in a ritual which I describe in my book, a ritual which is basically, it's described, I cite simply what Michael Aquino wrote. It's a ritual which him and Anton LaVey did to evoke the spirit of Marilyn Monroe. They had to go in the middle of the night, in the middle of the summer, to the house where she died. Then after that, they went on to the temple, and in that temple, she was evoked. And the ritual was so successful that after the ritual, Anton LaVey bestowed upon Michael Aquino the title of Magister Templi. And of course, once you bestow the higher title, Michael Aquino said, okay, I'm going to do my own sect. And he went on and did the Temple of Set. He said, bye-bye. I don't want to have anything to do with it. I'm a Magister Templi too. And that's it. So he created this schism together with a few officers of the military intelligence. He managed to also do a ritual in the Wewelsburg Castle, which was used by Himmler in Germany. And this, of course, was the opening of a portal, just like we discussed prior to the show regarding CERN, that was a ritual opening of a gate, of a dimensional gate, something that now the scientists would like to do in a more materialistic way rather than metaphysical way, simply by breaking down to the atom and getting into another dimension, and then at that point literally opening the gates of hell for these entities to come into our dimension. It's terrible what is happening, but I mean, it's obvious that it has an occult connection, because we saw also what happened with the filming of CERN, what was deemed as simply a mockery ritual, but it was a human sacrifice, though even if it wasn't, it was simply a mocking of it. We know that the secret societies do that regularly. The Bohemian Grove does that, Bohemian Club at Bohemian Grove does that. So why not the other one? I mean, when I saw that ritual in front of CERN, which you can still find on the
Oh yeah,
I'll pull up that picture.
yeah.
You can actually see that those people are walking in a certain way, and the way they're walking, the way they're acting with their cloaks and everything, is typical of people who have an occult background. It's not an actor. To do certain things in a way that is ritualistic, and the ritual itself creates a magnetic force. Let's remember that. So what better place to do it than CERN, where you're actually working with the electromagnetic forces of half of the planet? And that, so I think definitely that is an interesting point.
It's so important people understand this, because it's very much a part of your life, whether you accept it or not. There's a reason why they call it the left-hand path as well. But, you know, if we could back up just a little bit to Jack Parsons, who was the father of modern rocketry, changed our military, our country, and the world in a very short period of time.
It was the fruit of this lodge that was originally in Hollywood, then arrived in Pasadena, went through some turmoil, but he eventually managed to take it over. And in that lodge, of course, then he attracted people like Hubbard, the future founder of Scientology, and then they both went into the desert to do this ritual of the Antichrist, because the portal that they opened was actually so effective that they started to trigger what we now call UFO sightings, that really were kind of like became more and more as they went on with this ritual. Then eventually Parsons died, probably killed by Hubbard, who himself then justified himself, saying, oh, well, no, I'm just an infiltrator. I'm just working for the military intelligence of the Navy. I'm just doing a job here. I'm infiltrating a black sect, cult. I have nothing to do with. What are we talking about? The guy stole even the money of poor Parsons, apart from the women.
Oh, he stole his wife. I mean, he
stole
his wife. He stole his boat.
No, he stole the wife, the love, the money.
Mm-hmm. And in that ritual in the desert, were they not trying to raise the Red Lady or the Whore of Babylon? This was in 1946. Ish. No, Hillary Clinton was born in 1947. Okay. Spoiler alert.
Okay.
But some speculate that she is the result of this ritual. I don't know. I don't want to draw.
A lot of speculation. Yeah, listen, during my time, even in the OTO, there was a lot of speculation about Aleister Crowley being the father of Barbara Bush. I mean, I think that we need to stick to the facts.
Sure, right, sure.
But
I wondered what they were doing in the desert when it was Parsons.
Well, they were doing what they do, and they do a ritual of that kind, which is to open a portal and to invite those. The thing was this: you basically want to do this. You want to impregnate the woman at a certain time, a certain hour, a certain minute for receiving a certain planetary spirit. In that moment, you know that you have the possibility of guessing that spirit. They were aiming for the Antichrist, or the spirit of the highest entity, to be incarnated in these operations that they were doing. It didn't work out well for Parsons.
No.
Because, of course, once he was deemed a danger for connecting, also, you have to understand, that Parsons wasn't the only guy working for what became later NASA. There was also von Braun and the Nazis that were part of this whole thing. And the Nazis themselves already, in a way, had dealt with Aleister Crowley many years earlier in Germany. And of course, Crowley went on from the moment he came back from America. And the moment he came back from America and he wanted to convince everybody that he was a prophet of Thelema, well, he went to first of all, to the lodges in Germany, because they were the lodges of the Illuminati. So he wanted to, and he actually managed to convert some very high-level Nazis that later on became high-level Nazis. At the same time, though, you have to understand that for many, even the Führer itself was the magical child of Adolf Hitler, because he incarnated the will. Love is the law, love under will. The will was this triumph of the will, which became also a famous movie. And when it comes to the famous movie, I, in fact, right at the beginning of this book, show how this is very important when it comes down to Adolf Hitler, the picture with his own film director of all the major films, which is, of course, Leni Riefenstahl. Leni Riefenstahl was this film director of Triumph of the Will, you know, the film that was done for the Olympics, parading the, you know, this muscular, heroic German, superior German, okay? Now, she was with Walt Disney in 1939, just before the war started. This is something that people, you know, so, I mean, what was she doing with Walt Disney? And so I mean, it's about explaining to people that behind the scenes, regardless, and that was also the year in which Goebbels was pushing for the 440 rather than 432 tuning of all instruments. And later on, just after the war, ISO was created. ISO, the Institute for Standardization, which then forced everybody to tune their instruments in a certain way. What does it mean, tuning instruments in a certain way? It means simply depriving them of having the freedom to express themselves and to reach certain tonalities which might be more inspiring. Music, at times, especially certain kind of music, can really make you elevate spiritually. Music is fundamental. Music is sacred. And that's why the 7 notes come from, like I described in this book right at the beginning, the 7 notes, Guido d'Arezzo, because, of course, in Anglo-Saxon countries, it's A, B, C, D, but in the continent, in Europe, that is Do, Re, Mi, Fa, Sol, La, Si. And these notes actually come from a song, a poem, sung poem of that Guido d'Arezzo put together, dedicated to St. John the Baptist. So, which is one of the 2 main figures with St. John the Evangelist of Freemasonry. And Freemasonry, of course, collects a lot of its teaching from the ancient mystery schools. And so the mystery school that more than others influences, and I talk about music, is the Pythagoreans. They are very much the early Illuminati. And at times they behaved in a certain way. So in my book, I try to explain how we went from, you know, the music of the great Illuminati like Mozart, who was an Illuminati, yes, but it was an Illuminati who still retained his own freedom of expression, who was probably not initiated into the highest levels, so to understand the whole conspiracy, he might have perceived only part of it, because it was very compartmentalized, the order of the Illuminati. So the Minervals didn't know what was going on top, and the whole system was built in a way to disguise the project, which was to destroy all the monarchies and all the religions. which is a project which I described very well in volume 7 of my Confessions, because I also, in the last chapter of volume 7, I describe how this has influenced very much the course of Western history, because then most monarchies became constitutional monarchies. The ones that didn't accept the Illuminati in any way or their control became obliterated, destroyed, like the Tsar or the Kaiser, eliminated. The only one that survived was the British royal family, because they, of course, made a deal with the Illuminati. They were the heads of Freemasonry worldwide, because speculative Freemasonry worldwide, for legitimacy, is always looking at the United Grand Lodge of England. Still to this day, we are in the year 2023, and they are talking now that in the next few days, the United Grand Lodge of England is going to make a great announcement and finally announce that they will accept women in Masonic lodges. Now, this after a lot of criticism, especially because in the last few years they've been accepting drag queens that pretend to be women, or women that pretend to be men, and gender fluid people and all kinds of bullshit, but not women. So that it was, I think that personally, if this happens this year, like this is privileged information, how many people know this? So you are kind of a little bit, some of the first I say this. It's like, if they really accept women into Freemasonry, it means that the Grand Orient of France and what they created with co-Masonry actually at the end wins the war. What does it mean, this, though, for us? It means that the liberal, progressive destruction of society is now unavoidable, because it's not because I don't want the women in lodges. I actually initiated my wife in Freemasonry by bringing her in a lodge which was kind of like issued with a charter, but they were all regular Freemasons, but then they were women. It was in London, and I wanted to give her this experience. But the problem is that in the end, to be honest, the Masonic initiation should be always, in a way, it's separated, because it's a solar initiation. So if you are a woman receiving a solar initiation, you have to change the ritual to make it more like a lunar initiation. Now, this is also depending on the mystery schools. You have to understand the sun and the moon represent two schools. It's also the female school, the female mystery schools and the male mystery have seldomly be united, because they each have their own characteristic due also to their own, the way they are born. However, these days, because of course, regarding we are living in a woke culture, everything is mixed. The guy wakes up in the morning in Hollywood and says that his son is recognizing himself as a woman, then fluid, then whatever, and it's so great. And Hollywood is pushing this. So Hollywood is really at the epicenter of what the alchemists used to call projection.
Right.
And they are projecting into our society all their ideology, especially with the support of the great resetter himself, Klaus Schwab. In fact, there is a whole chapter of my book dedicated to the World Economic Forum favorite movies and to how they have financed people like DiCaprio and others, and how basic DiCaprio, by the way, who, he has a lot of skeletons in the closet there.
Yeah.
Right. Leo, I have a quick question. So in your book, in chapter 1,
Yes.
it says, is there a frequency of evil?
Yeah.
How would you answer that? I mean, I know that of course people are going to read your book,
Okay.
but
yeah, sure.
Please go ahead.
You are a musician, so you understand the frequency. Now, when it comes down to frequency, I immediately, as a record producer, tell people I used to love producing vinyl records, because vinyl records used to give me a profundity, especially because up until the 1990s, early 2000s, you could actually reverse on vinyl everything that you had recorded on a digital audio tape. Now, a digital audio tape wasn't cut at 44.1 like a CD. It was going to 48 hertz, and it create much more profound sound. The analogic sound is different from the digital sound. The sound has become more and more polluted by this digitalization. So you arrive to the cheap MP3 formula with no resolution that is kind of normalized in the ears of people, but it's not normalized in my ears, because for me it's like fast food compared to a great meal.
An Italian meal.
That's a beautiful
But, it's like comparing McDonald's to an Italian meal.
Right. Yeah.
I mean, you can appreciate it for what it is, but that's it. Doesn't really give you, it doesn't make you go out the rest and say, wow.
Yeah. Exactly. Paisan. Oh.
And so that's what happens with the music and with the sound. So the first thing was to transform it into CD. No, the CD culture 44.1. There was already a cap there, but after we entered the digital era with streaming, and then you enter the great reset when you will own nothing and be happy. Because do you own your tracks on iTunes? Do you own your tracks purchased from another streaming company? Do you have anything tangible, a cover of a record that you will leave to your son or grandson? I would be able to leave 20,000 records to my posterity. What will you be leaving in digital? Nothing. Thin air. So it's a very different kind of situation. And the frequency of the devil is also the fact that there is actual frequencies that are literally diabolic and that have been used deliberately to pollute our own dimension. Because when I am playing music at a certain frequency, I will then react. My body is made of water, prevalently of water, and so it will influence my body and might even create some sickness. This is something that people don't really think about when they listen to music. Maybe even when they enter, not even their own music, they simply enter into a supermarket and they start listening in the background to some rubbish, some music in the background. They don't think about the damage that the music is giving them. In the ancient mystery school, priests were often musicians as well as scientists, philosophers, and initiates. People don't remember that, tend to forget that. The best known example, like I said, is Pythagoras. And he was initiated in the Egyptian mystery schools in Alexandria of Egypt. That's where most of the great philosophers of ancient Greece were initiated and got their knowledge from. Then developed in their own way. And the way that Pythagoras developed it was through creating also a mystery school that he will transmit his own teachings. But music it's very, like I said earlier, when I said that the hymn of the 12th century of Guido d'Arezzo was based on St. John the Baptist, it has always a sacred connotation, but it has in modern music, we can see that it becomes more and more demonic, that certain frequencies are used, because you are using also, you can use sounds that literally evoke entities. Entities can be evoked in a number of ways, and you can facilitate the evocation of entities also by burning certain kinds of incense, certain kinds of smells, in your sacrificing, like I said, animals, leaving the rotten body of the animal for days, and then celebrating a ritual around it. You can imagine what you are. No, you are kind of dealing with death and decay. And entities kind of prey on it. They eat entities, depending on what they are. Usually, like for example, in various traditions, we have always, even in the Muslim tradition, even when the Prophet himself said, don't deal with genies, don't deal with these entities, still, when they inaugurate a new house or they have a new child, they usually sacrifice something, an animal, a lamb, a thing. They start doing, giving some force to this entity. So the music is something that it can be sacred, but it can be also out of tune. And the frequency of the devil came with, first of all, the standardization of music, which was from 432 to 440, imposed in 1939, like I said earlier, by Nazi propaganda minister Joseph Goebbels. Then also later in that period, in association with the BBC, because before the war started, the Germany and the Royal House were very much connected, as the Royal House, the Windsor is a reality, the Hanoverian, it's basically it's a German, it was partly German since the time of Queen Victoria. Then there is a part of the family that fortunately changed that path when they married with the Queen Mother, which is the mother of Queen Elizabeth, the Queen Mother, who was the cousin of my grandfather. So Scottish aristocracy saved the day, especially during the war, because I don't think that the royal family would have been very credible fighting the Germans with a Nazi accent. With a Nazi German accent. No, they retained more credibility in that way, I guess. And but like I said in my book, if people think that there was no connections, they just need to see that infamous photo of Queen Elizabeth, young Queen Elizabeth, raising her right hand, making the Nazi salute. Just so people understand the connections. And there was a very tight connection between English and German Freemasonry, which are both very powerful, and also English and German Rosicrucians, which are the heads of Freemasonry. So this link, very tight, within the Knights Templars in England, in Scotland, and the ones in Germany. So there was always this connection. It happened during the war also that when Rudolf Hess came and delivered that message, was arrested, suddenly they had the idea of calling Aleister Crowley. Ian Fleming had this idea. Ian Fleming, who then wrote the 007 book, so that now suddenly they want to change, because in this age of wokeness, they want to rewrite everything. James Bond becomes,
his face says it all.
Yes. Yeah.
Oh my God.
I reacted much the same way.
Oh
Yeah.
my God.
No, I mean, they say that he's a masculinist, he's a racist, he's a chauvinist, he's this and that. They have to rewrite the books of James Bond. They have to actually probably employ a black James Bond, a gay James, whatever. They have to just make him woke.
Yeah, Games Bond.
James Bond.
Yes, G-A-Y-M-E-S, Games Bond.
Yeah, I guess. We have already.
He'll be part Asian, part black, a little bit.
Well, no, the new James Bond is a black
female.
female.
Yeah.
So,
Why was it? Yeah.
The new 007? To be fair to
but she might be a transgender. Yeah.
We'll see.
Well,
things get stranger every day, don't they? Yeah.
Well, we have the evil character with laughing kicking, which is Klaus Schwab, the head of the World Economic Forum. He seems to be really the typical James Bond villain.
Oh, yes.
That's for sure. And actually, the James Bond villain, like I explained in volume 7 of my Confessions, was based on a real character. Himself, somebody who was a really scary arm dealer and of sorts, and a character who influenced very much also Anton LaVey later on of the Church of Satan. So all these things are interconnected. There is a complete connection between these things. In fact, when I then terminate the book, it's like James Bond, but at Her Majesty's service, and they all go to Her Majesty's service, at the end. The Beatles wanted to be knighted. Mick Jagger received the knighthood from Prince Charles at that time because Queen Elizabeth didn't want to show up and show herself to Mick Jagger, but now he's the king, King Charles III. All these pop icons, Lady Gaga went in front and got presented to Queen Elizabeth II. Lady Gaga, who made a Netflix documentary using the music of Lucifer Rising of Kenneth Anger, the music of Bobby Beausoleil that was played by Bobby Beausoleil in prison, because Bobby Beausoleil is still in prison for one of the Charles Manson murders because he was part of the family. He killed a guitarist, he tortured, he killed them. This is basically what happened. I mean, when you will read the volume 8, you will probably come out of it and you will say, whoa, because then you have also the truth about what happened when they invoked the Antichrist, Anton LaVey, Kenneth Anger, everybody in San Francisco between 1966 and 68, after the foundation of the Church of Satan. They rented the former Russian embassy and did a ritual to evoke the Antichrist. That ritual with the music of Mick Jagger became later on the film Invocation of My Demon Brother. In reality, it was supposed to become Lucifer Rising, a film that then was stolen by Bobby Soleil, buried in the desert here in Death Valley, never to be found again. The remains became this short film called Invocation of My Demon Brother. So these are like interesting anecdotes, but there is many like this around the book. But the reality is that definitely Satanism is alive and kicking in Hollywood and has a long, long history. And the New World Order, as it's manifesting today, it's definitely the product also of a well-orchestrated scenography and a story that is also written in Hollywood every day. And with the films, as well as with the music, of course, we have said modern music, having been so much influenced by Alice Crowley. In fact, there is a whole chapter in my book, which is basically all the bands, and I'm not talking only about the Beatles or Jimmy Page, but there is an infinite number of people, including Marilyn Manson, but many others, in Black Sabbath, of course, Mr. Crowley with Ozzy Osbourne. Ozzy Osbourne, pioneer of the worst kind of TV as well as the worst kind of music, because with Black Sabbath, he became the pioneer of what became basically heavy metal, and then later on would become black metal and all those kind of metals, which of course are clearly affected by Satanism. So I think that today in this interview, we have been able to really go in depth into the book. I will probably the only thing that I would like to add is also that in my book you will find a very detailed explanation of how LSD affected Hollywood, which is also a very important tool. Because like I've been viewing recently more and more, Hollywood is again infatuated with psychedelics, and maybe now it's ayahuasca rather than peyote, or rather they're actually relaunching LSD once again. It's becoming cool once again. It's like kind of they need this. Why taking a trip can be a negative thing? Well, it can be a very positive thing. It can be a life-changing experience that brings you to a certain degree of awareness. It can, in the majority of cases, bring you to hell and never come back. And you will have open yourself to forces that you don't really imagine. The power and the influence over your life. So you are giving yourself to I think that it's very important that people realize how the MK Ultra program was born to experiment all this. And so if we have now a return of psychedelic drugs, we have also the return of MK Ultra style manipulation that is kind of wanting to reprogram once again our society, because what happened with the LSD was reprogramming our society, you know, with events like Woodstock, which was experiments that were conducted by the CIA using thousands of people that voluntarily went there. And I describe in my book all the agents involved for the distribution of the LSD, how it was organized, orchestrated, the names, the district attorney at the time, everybody involved. So this book is facts rather than fiction. And I hope it will give our viewers today the opportunity also of defending themselves and of bringing their friends and family to the realization that it's about time to consider a healthy distance from certain things. I mean, you can still listen to some music in the right frequency, in the right way, without exaggerating. You can still view a movie without being completely carried away with it. You can avoid, of course, going to watch Babylon and being bombarded in the cinema, because when you go and that is also something I describe in my book, when you go in front of a movie in the cinema screen, in the actual theater where you see the movie there, it's a different experience from you have at home. Yes, you can recreate it at home, but that's where they bombard you with the sounds and the visuals and the frequency at maximum, and you come out after this ritualistic popcorn eating like, because it's not any longer the movie where you have the great actor that is giving his majestic Shakespearean performance. No, you are in front of Godzilla, monsters, graphic, Avatar, BS that is nothing to do with art. It's all to do with manipulation. I mean, the new Avatar movie is simply manipulating the people, and it's already a first stage of throwing them into the metaverse almost these days. It's like they are not even going back into making good movies. They don't care any longer. They just want to throw us all in the metaverse. And that's where also, like I say in my book, unfortunately, Hollywood is heading to with the artificial intelligence, which also has an important part nowadays, even in the production of movies, as well as writing the scripts, which is you know, ChatGPT can write a script, and people are so lazy these days in the universities and in the schools where they're supposed to study cinema history, and probably they will come out brainwashed and they will be lazy enough to use all this artificial intelligence, and in the end the product of it will be, of course, more manipulation, because, like I explain in volume 7 of my Confessions and in the other books, we are heading towards 2030, the complete takeover of society, microchipping most of the world population, and that is something that we need to avoid. And that's why I propose in volume 7 of my Confessions to move towards micro societies and towards escaping the big cities, because the smart city solution is the not so smart, as well as the smart cars, smartphones, smart everything. It's not so smart. It's much better to be on an old RV from the 1960s rather than a modern one that you suddenly talk and Alexis. What?
Exactly. Couldn't agree more.
So thank you so much.
People don't know whether you know it or not, you're participating in the ritual. And at least if you're aware of these things, then you can neutralize those effects. And I encourage everybody to read Leo's books and become acquainted with this. This is our history. It's our hidden history. It's hidden for a reason. They don't want you to know these things, but it's I think more important than ever that we do understand this history. And you've laid it out beautifully in your books.
I try to do my best. Of course, here today we have focused on one side of the many aspects of this manipulation, but it was important for me, as I had my own direct experience with show business. I worked for many years behind the scenes as a record producer, a DJ, a radio presenter. It was for me also important because I started as a journalist with music journalism. So also it became obvious that at one point or another, I had to write a book to expose the world I had been directly involved with for years, and also to make the people understand its relevance and its importance in our own health. So this book wants to explain also how right from the beginning of the big pharma, how big pharma expanded the Flexner report. I mean, the very roots of the big pharma are also the roots of all this manipulation. The fact that you know, big pharma has decided for us what kind of medicines we can or we cannot use. The Flexner report also created for us this whole I mean, for people who don't know, the Flexner report is a work published in 1910, so it's not that old, but it was very much influential because it kind of it created what are the modern medical school establishment. It was this guy called Abraham Flexner who basically had the task of conducting and evaluating 155 medical schools, and he basically banned any form of alternative medicine on anything that could help us naturally. It became more and more focused on the chemical and less on any kind of form of spirituality or anything that could benefit us. So then, you know, from Flexner report to the pandemic, and that's it. And that's where we are today, in the hands of these criminals, which are connected with the Rockefeller Foundation, with the Rothschild, with the big families that also, of course, connected with the Sabbatean Frankist heresy, and with the Jesuits who are also in the Vatican, their own Catholic heretics of sorts that are also very powerful. So I think that the people who have the possibility of reading this book, which is only $23 for 700 pages almost.
That's a damn good deal.
And no, it's a very good deal because I continue saying this. I don't know for how long I'm going to be able to make this deal because it's like prices are growing for the production of books. But what I'm trying to do here, and people have noticed this, is when you open this book, is also very clear. The writing is very clear, very, so you don't have to force your eye. You know?
Yeah, wear my glasses.
Yeah, you know, and but it's also something that I wanted to make everybody acquainted with. So rather than pointing at, you know, like people sell 700 pages books for $35, $40, which is something that stays within the realm of an elite that kind of reads your book because it's interested and can afford it. I wanted to make it really affordable for everybody because I think that people need this book for their families, for their everyday living. And so I'm making my small contribution with my books, but I hope that it's an important one. Once this societal collapse will bring to the knees this culture of digital culture. That's why I always suggest to people, buy it in the paper format, even if you buy the digital format because it's convenient, the Kindle, to go around instead of with a big book like this that, of course, you don't know where to put when you go around in your at the cafe or the restaurant, whatever, and you want to read. It's more convenient, of course, the Kindle, and I make that Kindle available. But remember that the artificial intelligence is monitoring you, and one day they will push a button and you will end up with all those books disappearing like this. And so hard copy, and
it's like vinyl compared to an MP3.
Well, it's probably a good time to mention Joe,
are things that you can hold in your hands and you can actually be able to give to your own posterity.
Right.
I still have in my 10,000 books collections, books that were of my grandfather, great-grandfather, father. So you are able to, unfortunately, this kind of thing doesn't happen with digitalization.
Right.
you're left with nothing. People just have their mobile phones. They own nothing and they will be happy. It's not me. I want to own a lot of things and I want to be happy because I own them. That's it.
Yeah.
Well, I was just going to say, Joe and I are going to be launching a store just of our favorite things, contributions from wonderful guests like Leo. And, I talked to Brad. He's agreed that we'll be carrying his books, and we'd love to carry your books as well, just so that people have easy access to them.
Yeah, we give extended distribution. Of course, I work in a different way. I don't have the possibility of a great company. Brad has a bigger company, so we don't have, like a depot with all the books, storage, and all that.
Oh yeah, we'll figure it.
We'll work out the details.
We'll work out the details.
But we give the opportunity to people who have, of course, like stores like yours, to buy the book cheap at extended distribution price, which makes it very then good for them for making some money also with it, of course. So I have that opportunity for people who are interested. Mine is a very modest publishing house, because we are born out of necessity, with the fact that I had to flee Italy, and I find myself in this country, which is becoming my home now after all these years. I've been moving here in May 2019. But of course, I don't have the things that I had when I was back in Italy. A lot of the things I had to leave back then, my records, I will not be able to fit in this modest place I have now if I had all my records I had in Italy, all the things I had back then when I was in Italy. I simply have to live in a more restricted space, so I have to be more mobile even myself, though I still give importance to the little things that I managed to carry around with me. In fact, I arrived, I remember, from Italy in 2019 with a bunch of books, things, cases, I had like 5 cases full of stuff, and then every now and then I get my mother to send me maybe a box or 2 of books and of things from Italy. So thank you so much for having me on. And I will speak to you hopefully soon for the next.
You're always welcome. Please
absolutely.
come back.
Yes, and Leo, can you please share your website so people can find you and any information about you?
Yes, my website is leozagami.com. You can find all my latest articles, linked to all my latest books, which, by the way, are sold, like I said, also on Amazon. So you just put Leo Zagami, Lion Zagami on Amazon, you get all the books, from the ones, of course, previously published with Brad, to the ones also which I've been publishing with my own publishing house, which is called Cursum Perficio, which focuses mainly on the books which I've been writing directly in the English language rather than translating them. Though this latest book was also a translation effort by, we went back to some translation effort because it was published in 2 languages. So I published it both in Italian and in English. But you can find me always at leozagami.com, because we are censored constantly on other platforms. So, rather than go and find me around, just go on my website, and you can get also my email, or the Illuminatorum Universalis at gmail.com, where you can also, if you want to contact me for any eventualities, talks, rather than conference or other things, you can do it through the mail. So thank you very much. God bless you all in your great setup back there where you are.
That's right.
Thank you so much, Leo.
Thank you, Leo, so much.
Very analogic, very, very nice. From which year is the setup? And the 60s?
We're in a 1969 Airstream Sovereign, so we're in a work of art, and we don't do a lot of plugs, but I will say this: we're going to put all your links below, and we're also going to put our film below that I got to act in. I got to write the score for, and this amazing man got to shoot, so you can see his cinematography. So anyway, it's called A Perfect Life. So we hope we have you back very soon. You are an amazing resource of knowledge, and we appreciate you so much. And this has been a beautiful conversation from another Paisan. Thank you, Leo.
Hey, Paisa, a presto, as I would say in Italy. See you soon.
All right, my friend. Take care.